Hi, everybody. Julianna Forlano here for act.tv. Did you know that 2/3 of the people holding the $1.6 trillion, possibly more, of student debt in our country are Black women? 2/3 of that debt are held by one group, an astounding figure that was brought to our attention by a rally on the steps of the Capitol organized by the Hip Hop Caucus to urge President Biden to cancel student debt. We're going to be covering that action in our action rundown. And then in the second half of the show, a conversation with Professor Richard Wolff, host of Economic Update and regular on this program. We're going to be talking with him on the effect canceling debt for student loan borrowers would have on the economy and on our society as a whole. I think you're going to be surprised at his answer. I am also going to get his thoughts on this Bitcoin crash. I'm sure he'll have some witty things to say about that. And I'm going to be asking him about the general state of the economy, possible war with Russia. And if we can squeeze it all in, I might even shake his brain down about UBI. All that coming up on this show starting now. This month, the Hip Hop Caucus held a rally for the cancellation of student debt, and we streamed it right here across act.tv platforms. Hip Hop Caucus, in case you didn't know, is an organization that connects the hip hop community, that is 14 to 40-year-olds, so I'm out, who identify with hip hop culture and share values of justice and equity, bringing these people to the political process to build power and to create change. So President Joe Biden had made his campaign promise for the relief of student debt. The Hip Hop Caucus came together to pressure him to act, shall we say, more robustly on his promise. Let's take a look at what Biden said when he was still on the campaign trail. Roll it, Phil.
Did President Biden pledge to forgive federal student debt loan? Our sources are Joe Biden's 2020 campaign website, the White House Communications Office, Federal Reserve Economic Data, Federal Student Aid, and the U.S. Department of Education. During the campaign, President Biden said his job and the economic recovery agenda would focus on providing relief from student debt.
I'm prepared to write off the $10,000 debt.
His 2020 campaign website confirms his plan to cancel a minimum of $10,000 of federal student loan debt. He also went as far as to say he'd forgive all undergraduate tuition-related federal student debt from public colleges and universities and private HBCUs for people making up to $125,000 per year. So, yes, we can verify President Joe Biden has previously pledged to forgive at least $10,000 of federal student loan debt for each borrower.
What about the students? Is now a time to forgive student debt and then restructure how we pay for college so we're not here again in 10 years?
The answer is yes. That's why I proposed and the House, Nancy, put it in the plan to immediately provide $10,000 in debt relief as stimulus right now for students. A minimum of $10,000 relief. You get all these degrees, you end up with all this debt, and you're in a position where you can't get a job because no one's hiring, or if they're hiring at very low wages. And so what we have to do is we have to make sure that you get the opportunity. That's why I'm going to eliminate a lot of your student debt. If you, in fact, if you come from a family less than 125 grand and you went to a public university, I'm going to make sure that everybody in this generation gets $10,000 knocked off of their student debt as we try to get out of this god-awful pandemic.
There you go. Those were his promises made on the campaign trail. Now let's talk about what he did. So far, Biden has canceled $15 billion in student loans. That is more than any other president, and more than 675,000 student loan borrowers have benefited. He's doing it through specific plans. The borrower defense to repayment, 1.5 billion was canceled there. The total and permanent disability folks, $7 billion canceled there. ITT Tech students got $1.3 billion in forgiveness, and the public service loan forgiveness got $5 billion. Biden has also extended temporary student loan relief 3 times for a total of 15 months. His extensions of student loan relief collectively would have saved us, and I guess I still consider myself a student if you have a student loan. Anyway, student loan borrowers, approximately $75 billion in student loan interest. But people are still suffering, and the economy is not offering opportunities to get out from under these predatory loans. And so far, student loan cancellation has benefited only about 1.5% of student loan borrowers and less than 1% of outstanding student loan debt. So basically, not enough. Biden said he's ready to cancel student loans for millions of borrowers. Again, he said up to $10,000. They said in that video a minimum of $10,000, also a maximum of $10,000 for Biden, and that he would sign any student loan cancellation legislation that Congress sends him. Is this a punt? Congress hasn't passed any wide-scale student loan forgiveness and likely won't either, because some corporate Dems won't support it and no Republicans. I mean, we didn't even ask them. It was just probably a non-starter. So anyway, the administration is saying they don't believe Biden has the authority, the executive authority, to enact wide-scale student loan cancellation without further authorization from Congress. He is not a king, after all, and there are some structures remaining in place that limit executive authority, thank goodness. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi backs him up, saying that the president doesn't have the authority to cancel those loans unilaterally without Congress. Even if the president could use an executive order to forgive student loan debt, which he cannot, according to Forbes and other people, there are regulations that would prevent any president from forgiving the student loan debt of borrowers who are able to repay their student loans, quote, within a reasonable period of time. Is the 40-year plan reasonable? I'm asking for a friend. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Elizabeth Warren believe he can just cancel it by executive order. And they have called on the president to immediately forgive $50,000 per borrower. So what's the reality here? Who knows? There's some further shadiness. Last year, Biden called on the U.S. Department of Education to prepare a report on Biden's legal authority, or lack thereof, to outright forgive student debt. Yes, last year. And guess what? It's done. And it's just been sitting there. I mean, he's at least been looking into it, but currently the report is almost completely redacted. In fact, 80 Congresspeople sent the Biden administration a letter just last week saying, excuse me, could we see what's in this report so we can move ahead? All of this raises questions. Who redacted the report? Does the report say Biden can do it and he doesn't want anyone to know this because he's beholden to corporate interest? Is Pelosi right that Biden can't legally forgive loans? Are Schumer and Warren just posturing with their $50,000 forgiveness ask, knowing that he can't do it? What does Bernie say? I don't want to turn into Tucker Carlson, who just asks questions and doesn't give any answers. But what I do know is that the effect these loans are having on working people, well, it's bad. First of all, I know it because I live it. And second of all, because the Hip Hop Caucus action really brought home the enormous effect these predatory debts are having on borrowers. Here is Reverend Lennox Yearwood, the president of the Hip Hop Caucus, on the effects of student debt and how it is destroying communities and worse.
There are Americans who have now committed suicide because they no longer can take the toll of the student loan debt crisis on them. We have $1.6 trillion in debt across this country. We have literally hundreds of thousands of Americans, black, white, brown, red, male, female, straight, gay, who are struggling under debt in this country, and we are doing nothing.
That again was Reverend Yearwood. He is the president of the Hip Hop Caucus. Up next from that event that happened in Washington, D.C. earlier this week is another woman, Shakyak Cherry Donaldson, the director of 1,000 Women Strong, who talks about how the current extension of relief simply isn't enough.
Economic
And she makes
burden of
a
student
little
loan debt.
Well, you can hear her in her own words. Go ahead.
Under this economic burden of student loan debt, we are being crushed. Our dreams are being crushed, our possibilities are being squandered, and our potential is really being cut short. Because without student loan debt cancellation, we are living under the burden of constant debt. I cannot tell you the amount of calls I got in early December when the letters started going back out. People were freaking out. People all across the country. I thought you said they were going to help us. I thought you said this was going to be over. What is happening? As we were going into the holidays and this Omicron variant, people saw no way out. So while they gave us an extension, it is still an extension for the relief. It is still not a solution. And we are here to be solution-oriented people. And the only solution that we'll take now is demanding $50,000 of student loan debt cancellation for all eligible borrowers now. It needs to happen before the moratorium ends. It needs to happen before this midterm cycle. It needs to happen right now. It needs to happen for the millions of Americans, including Black women, predominantly Black women that hold 2/3 of this $1.6 trillion debt as the most educated subdivision in this country. If you trust Black women, trust us now and cancel this debt and allow us to continue to live and liberate our communities and ourselves.
I mean, that figure was, again, astounding and astonishing that 2/3 of the debt is held by Black women. I think it's important that we all bear in mind and perhaps remind people who would not be necessarily for canceling student debt that when you're educated, you add to society. It's not necessarily about people getting for themselves. You cannot add to society while you're crippled with debt. And so everyone pays for people not being able to contribute to society and live up to their potential. I mean, the debt is another way to keep people in bondage. A spokesperson for the White House said the president continues to look into what debt relief actions can be taken administratively. But the next speaker, Ms. Vines, from the founder of Live Movement, she spoke of the bipartisan practice of breaking campaign promises and urges Biden to act more robustly and not incrementally on his word. Let's take a listen.
My message today is very simple, and it's not just to Joe Biden, but it is also to our Vice President, Kamala Harris, my fellow Bison. Do your job. It is very simple. The message has been clear. We have been screaming the same things since before 2020. There are things and systems that have been put in place consistently to oppress Black people in America. And I'll be very honest. I had an interview yesterday, and we talked about cancellation of student loan debt. And they asked, were you surprised? Are you surprised that Joe Biden went back on his word? Are you surprised that he cut the budget that he promised during his campaign from $43 billion to $2 billion for HBCU students? I said, absolutely not. I'm not surprised. I'm not, because we have learned, and if we haven't, I really hope that we do, as American citizens, especially as Black people. Politicians are going to say whatever they need to get into their positions of power, and then when they secure that position of power, they're going to work on their own personal vendettas. This has been proven. This has been a trend. This has been a culture. They made these promises because it sounded good. It sounded sweet. They wanted us to flood those polls. And to be very clear, a majority of the students that went to the polls was not pro-Biden. It was anti-Trump. Let's keep it real. We was trying to get people out of the White House. So now that we have Joe Biden, what we are trying to ask him to do, what we are demanding for him to do, is to do his job. But to be very clear, my message to Black and brown people, not just in the DMV area, but across the nation, we need to figure out how to mobilize as one and lessen our dependency on the federal government and more dependency on our people, on the community. How are we going to mobilize? How are we going to strategize behind the scenes so that we no longer have to look to Joe Biden as he continues to make false promises, or look to Kamala Harris that says, okay, our American arms are open for people, and then say, okay, never mind, go home once she makes it through those double doors? What we have to do is figure out a way as Black people, knowing our power and knowing the strength in numbers and just the power that we literally have taken and kept since we came to America across the transatlantic slave trade, and figure out what does it look like if we no longer depended on the government. So right now, in my 21 years of living, I have understood, and I do recognize this: the promises that are made by those that sit in these positions of power in the government, they are usually false. Let that really sink into people. I understand the faith that we continue to try to have in the government, but let's look historically at what they have fallen through on and what they have promised. Does it line up?
I mean, we could look at that all day, but yes, basically on this issue, the Biden administration has, they haven't exactly come through, and they need to find a way to unilaterally cancel student debt, be it $10,000 per borrower, $50,000 as Warren and Schumer seek, or the Bernie canceled the whole $1.7 trillion shebang and tell Sally Mae to stick it where the sun don't shine bill, number 85777. Anyway, something needs to be done, and it needs to happen fast. Coming up to discuss this and other economic-related topics, my interview with Professor Richard Wolff, the host of Economic Update. Stay tuned. You're watching actTV. My guest today is Professor Richard Wolff. We've been talking about canceling student debt, the Hip Hop Caucus, as you just saw right before the break. Or if you're watching on YouTube, go check it out. The Hip Hop Caucus gathered to encourage the Biden administration to cancel student debt. We're going to be talking with Professor Wolff. Hi, there you are. Hi, Professor Wolff.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here, Julianna.
It's such an interesting conversation. I remember you surprised me in conversation once before with your opinion about canceling student debt. I believe it was a measure you didn't necessarily support because of its societal implications. Can you talk about your thoughts about the movement to cancel student debt?
Sure. On the one hand, of course, I think the best way to put this is to say, to pick up on something you said a few minutes ago. Education is something a society does because it is a benefit to its people, and it allows those people to be a lot more contributory to the society they live in for the rest of their lives. That's why we have everything from kindergarten through high school and on up to what we call higher education. We are taking care of ourselves, and we ought to understand it as an investment in ourselves. And therefore, we should do everything in our power to enable every young person who wants to go to college, to enjoy an education, to be able to give back to society because of that education. We should make it maximally easier to do that. Instead, in our strange country, we keep making it harder. We allow colleges and universities to be run like businesses, where the education is put secondary to making money. I mean, it's an absurd misunderstanding of what education is about. But I'll put that aside. We then take an even worse step. We put the price of that education out of reach of the vast majority of people, so that they're put into this absurd situation, choosing between getting an education they want, getting an education the society needs them to have, so we all get the benefit of educated people all around us. Instead of making it easier, they choose between that, which they want, and loading up on a level of debt which they may never be able to repay, and which hangs as one of those swords of Damocles right over their head for years and years and years. Let me drive it home another way. Germany, the most important economy in Europe, and 6 other European countries, for the reasons I just outlined, have declared, and it's been true for years now, no tuition, no school fees. You can get a BA degree, you can get a PhD, you can get whatever your education draws you to learn, and you don't have to pay a nickel. You have to take care of your room and board, which you would have had to do anyway. But they're not going to put an obstacle in your way, let alone price it so high that you have to go into debt. So my first reaction is we shouldn't be having this conversation. This is an outrage that Americans should never have allowed, and that the students should have taken the lead in saying, oh, no, either you lower the price so we can afford it, or get rid of it altogether like other countries are doing. By the way, when you ask the Germans, why do you do it? The Germans look at you and they smile and they say, one of the reasons we're the biggest and most important economy in Europe is because we do that. And we build our education up from the bottom and we educate our people.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting because it seems like, under capitalism, there is this idea of just don't other forces in the capitalist system see that they themselves need educated workers in order to say, build that new luxury apartment, high rise, design it. They need architects, etc. It seems like, we're on this path of like wealthy people and uneducated folks, people who can't afford an education and who are going to be trapped in sort of the unskilled jobs forever. It does seem to go against our best interests, even as a capitalist society, to not be at least supporting some people in getting their educations.
Well, your question is right on, but I'm afraid I'm going to get you a little down if I give you the answer. It used to be exactly what you say. That's why we have a public education system. In the 19th century, there were big fights in this country with many businesses against. They didn't want to be taxed to run a public school system. I mean, from kindergarten right on up through the 12th grade, they didn't want it. That had to be fought for by the working class who wanted an education. But you're right. There were always some capitalists who supported it because they understood they needed workers who could read and who could write and who could do arithmetic because they could be more productive that way. But now here comes what's going to get you down. Starting in the 1970s, huge numbers of American jobs were closed down and moved overseas. The capitalists who made that decision, the big American businesses who closed the factory in Cincinnati or Chicago or Gary, Indiana, or Rochester, New York, or any of the other places in this country that have all gone through this, those capitalists now they're aware Americans are not going to be the future workers. Chinese people are, Indian people are, Brazilian people are. They're actually more concerned to support education over there to train their workers. They don't need them here. They don't want to pay for school to have trained people that they don't need. And they want to go back. That's the harsh reality. They want to go back to what higher education was before World War II. And that was something that was either for farming, agricultural people, the big state universities in the Midwest, or it was the fancy Ivy League and Seven Sisters, the fancy littler colleges for the ruling class, for the rich, who were the only people who ever went there anyway. And all of that other stuff, state universities, state colleges, all of that apparatus that the working class won after World War II is being taken away. And one of the ways to do it is this debt trap, because what you're doing is by putting young people in this absurd situation, more and more of them are choosing not to go to college. The enrollments are down. Look at the numbers particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, but they've been trending down before that. And so what they're hoping for is that the people won't be angry that their education is taken away. They'll just quietly choose between unbearable debt and not going to school, and they'll decide not to go to school, and they hope maybe the problem will go away. But as the people you put up on the screen a few moments ago, there's still a big part of this population that's not prepared to go quietly, but is fighting. Last point. You asked me, and you're quite right about that comment I made to you. Here was what was in my mind then, and it's still in my mind. You can make a very good case that students shouldn't have been put in a position of debt. But you can make the same case about many of the other people in our society that are also suffering in unbearable debt. In Europe, for example, and I want to use Europe, there's a kind of unspoken rule in most countries. In public housing, which is a much bigger phenomena in Europe than it is here, housing owned and operated by the government. I like to use the case of Vienna, Austria, which is a city of renters. People don't own their own home. In that city, 2 million people, very big city, the capital of Austria, half of the apartments are either public, owned and operated, or public, regulated and subsidized. And the rule there is nobody pays more than between 20 and 25% of their household income in rent. That's a given and a guarantee of the government. We have nothing like that here. But we have therefore saddled Americans with unbearable mortgage debt. It's the biggest debt mountain on the American people. Why? Because the prices of housing relative to the income people get puts them in an impossible situation. They either have to rent because they can't buy, or they have to borrow a ton of money to buy a place, and then they sit with this burden of debt. And now that the Federal Reserve has told us that they're going to raise interest rates over the cost of housing is going to go up because of the cost of borrowing. I mean, it is a dead-end situation. And the only time I question is picking the students. I mean, it's going to make other people very angry and upset. Not that the students are getting relief, but that they aren't getting the relief. They've suffered. They've done without. They have the experiences, what the young people are using to say, we don't want to be slave debt to our debts, the way our parents have been most of their lives.
I mean, there are people who have chosen not to go to college, not to get into there, and their earning power has been lessened by that. It seems like if you remove the debt from people who went to college, then those other people that would not be a fair thing for the other people. And then there are people in medical debt, enormous amounts of medical debt here in the US because we don't have medical coverage. It seems to me, and I'm jumping to the third topic here, that a universal basic income would be a way to ameliorate against all the different, all the different traumas, economic traumas that people in the United States have had to go through. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's a difficult topic because under the heading universal basic income, very different ideas, very different plans have been articulated. So I don't have the time now, but at some point you have to kind of go through which one you mean if you're going to talk about it. But let's try to talk in a very general way.
Which one might work is the question I have.
I think the one that might work is the one that we can be really honest about. And that is either you're going to have a society ripped apart by absurd distances between rich and poor, which make the poor angry, bitter, envious for perfectly good reasons. They're excluded. They can't participate in half of what goes on because they don't have the money. And that puts the wealthy who think that they're on top of the world, scared to death that they may be assaulted when they go down the street, that they can't be trusting that someone isn't grabbing something from them because they're visibly wealthy. I mean, it's no good even for the rich But they, of course, don't know it. They don't want to think about it. So we keep going down this road. The universal basic income that I would support is one that says, okay, we're going to stop allowing the society to have that. It's like, let me give you an example from history. In the 19th century in this country, it was normal practice for capitalists to employ children as young as 5 and 6 years of age. It was normal. It was all over the place. Those children were therefore denied much of an education. They were taken away from their own childhood. They were subject to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse on a massive scale. And when there were people who said they didn't want their children to be suffering in this way, when they began to oppose it, here was the argument made against them. Well, you shouldn't do that because this is good for poor people. You see, in a poor family, not only can mother and father go out and earn income, but we're hiring the children too, and that adds to their income. We're performing an anti-poverty program. I mean, it makes you groan. Yes. But that's really what we have today. We are finding reasons to justify unspeakable poverty. I mean, half the people in this country literally live from paycheck to paycheck. Okay, so here's what I would support. A principled commitment, we're not going to allow that. Just like we did with child labor. At a certain point, the American people won. You can't employ anyone, it varies, but roughly 16 years of age or under. That's it. You can't do it. It's out. We don't want to hear about it. Don't tell us about poor people. This is an outrage against us as a people. We won't have it. The businesses said, it'll destroy our business. We can't compete. I mean, the rest of the world will take our business because we can't pay these children, the pittance that they were paying. All of these, we hear all the same stuff today. Can't raise the minimum wage. It'll destroy it. No, it won't. It will change the way this country works. I would support that. We should all have an income that's between this and that. There can be differences. You can acknowledge some people have a more difficult job. Some people have to go to school longer, whatever it is. But there's no reason. We have more than enough wealth. But it's true, we couldn't have Jeffrey Bezos. We couldn't have Elon Musk. We don't need them. There are plenty of people doing wonderful inventions of interesting things who don't require billions and billions of dollars. Never did. I tell people about the Nobel Prize, which is about the biggest thing an economist like me as a professor could ever hope to get. You know what it is? About $1 million. So many of us, I don't so much, but people like me strain and struggle and write their books and hope one day to get this recognition for $1 million. Nobody expects $1 billion. Nobody expects 200. It's not necessary. Never was. And I think if we had a basic income that was part of a reconstruction of what we mean when we distribute the wealth that, after all, we help all of us to produce, I think you'd get massive support for it. And it would be something that is a right you have as a human being to not be in poverty. The same way you have a right to go to the park that your community maintains on a Saturday afternoon with your friends and a blanket and have some beer and enjoy the countryside. The city does that for you, doesn't charge you for it. That's part of what living in this community entitles you to. Well, it ought to be a general rule and not just a handful of things.
So true. Professor Wolff, thank you for those words on cancellation of student debt and on universal basic income. Right, and turning to the present moment, right now the economy seems even more frightening and precarious than it was last time you were here, which was just 2 weeks ago or something like that. I would love to get your comments on Bitcoin and Wall Street, and also the fact that the store shelves are still empty. I went to go get some Pepto-Bismol for my daughter, and it was Sunday night. There wasn't any. None. at like 3 different stores in the area. And Pepto seems like the kind of thing they stock regularly. And this is not just, that's one tiny example, but we're not living in the pre-pandemic United States where you can just go to the store and anything you wanted was there.
Well, again, to be honest, and you wouldn't have me on this program if I weren't going to be
Please
truthful.
lie. Make us feel better. No.
I wish I could. If I thought I could, I would, but I can't. We are going through the decline of the United States capitalist system. We had a great ride up. It went from around 1820 to 1970, 150 years of not everybody, African Americans were left behind. And, we all know what country we live in. But for most Americans, and certainly for most white Americans, we had an incredible run as a country. 150 years of rising income for average people. The rich got very rich, but everybody got along on the ride. That ride stopped in the 1970s, and it never resumed. We didn't feel it then, but our wages stopped going up, and the only way our consumption kept going up is that we borrowed more money than any working class in the history of the world has ever borrowed before. And then that ran out because you can't keep borrowing if your underlying wage doesn't allow you to repay it. All of that fell apart in 2008. And now we are catching up to all that I just said. Our economy can't expand anymore. It is in trouble. It can't function the way it used to. That's why the things we used to think only happen over there, they don't have food on the shelf. They don't have trouble they have trouble in the streets. We don't. Well, the chickens are coming home. We are having all those problems. And of course, the people who don't want to see the big picture will tell you it's COVID. Truck drivers aren't feeling so well, or it's supply chain disruptions, whatever in the world that exactly means. They'll come up with this or that detail because they don't want to dare go through the hot stove of thinking that the economic system that we have been praising as a nation for most of the last 150 years is now in decline. That's why it's so painful to have to face that the growing economy in the world is in a place called China, which is growing much faster than we are. We tried to slap them down under Trump, accomplished absolutely zilch. Last year was one of their best years. It wasn't one of ours. We were barely recovering from the year before. We condemned them for locking everybody down. Guess what? They don't have supply chain problems because they locked down, isolated the COVID, and went to work. They have 4 times the number of people that we do. And they have between 6,000 and 7,000 dead people. We have 700,000+ dead people. There is no contest. We're not looking to see which society managed COVID better. The whole world is watching and knows only in the United States is there some ambiguity about all of this. And I think these are the signs that I'm afraid I have to tell you that because our leaders can't get their head around the idea that we may have an economic system that's got problems, they have to come up with something else or deny it altogether. And like in psychology, denial rarely solves your problem.
Or they're in bed with some of the, the people who are going to benefit. It's not like everyone's going to lose. Very few. There's a few people who will continue to benefit, and they are pulling the strings these days. People have, it's been a very interesting week, little more than a week, what with Bitcoin losing a huge amount of value. I just thought you would have some interesting thoughts on that. I mean, Bitcoin is insane in the first place. Am I right? And then people have lost what they thought was a fortune.
Well, let me respond by giving Bitcoin its due. Part of what's going on with Bitcoin is a very understandable feeling of large numbers of people that in this country, the financial system, the banks, they've wrapped it all up. They make a ton of money, and we are all forced to go through the bank. Every time you use a credit card, the money is going through the bank. The bank is who you pay your mortgage to. The bank is who you pay your credit card bill at the end of the month to, et cetera, et cetera. The banks, and there's a desire to be free of that. There's a desire to have some kind of money that doesn't put you in hock to the banking system, especially after they produced that crash in 2008, especially after the government, they arranged to bail them out while the average American was left high and dry. I mean, there's lots of anger. And part of the Bitcoin dream, what brings people to it, is the wonderful notion we can have money, but we don't need those horrible banks. So let's be kind and generous. That impulse is there. The problem is, it's the Wild West. All kinds of people can do all kinds of things in and with Bitcoin and manipulate it, which has been true of every money that has ever been created, whether it's been created by banks or by other government agencies or privately. This is not the first private money. The early America had private banks issuing their own money, so it's not the first time we've done it. But the manipulation of money is built into this system. You know, anything about which people say money makes the world go round is going to make an awful lot of criminals figure out where they should be going. They should be going to control the money. Bitcoin is not exempt from that process. And because it is a dream, it's easy for people to get frightened that this has now been hijacked by somebody. And indeed, the banks of the world are watching. The minute they think that Bitcoin might become a serious problem for them, they're going to be in there trying to control it and limit it. And their ability to do that, partly by bidding the price up, knocking it down, frightening the public, that will be part of whatever strategies they develop to try to control this. In other words,
think that's what's happening now?
Yes, you got to change this system. Otherwise, this system will undo, distort, twist, block your efforts. But you got to at least begin by understanding it's a system. There's no magic bullet. Bitcoin isn't a magic bullet. This law, that politician, we're beyond that. Our system is in the problem, and I know that's very hard for people to deal with, but if you don't deal with it, these problems are continuing to get worse and worse.
Professor Richard Wolff, what is coming up on your show Economic Update this week?
Well, this coming week, we're going to have John Nichols, who writes
The Nation. Yeah.
And he's going to be talking about his latest book, which has to do with his view of how and why the United States ended up having coped with the COVID crisis less well than almost every other country in the world.
Yes, he has a new book. It's called, what is it? Bandits, Profiteers, Pandemic Profiteers, and Coronavirus Criminals. Yes, excellent. That'll be, I look forward to hearing that.
But it's close to that. It's close to that.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we look forward to seeing that on YouTube and on radio stations across the country. Thank you so much for being here with us. As usual, I hope your Bitcoin still retains some value.
Yes.
We got a nice blessing to give to someone. May your Bitcoin retain
cross your
value.
fingers, because given all the players, the manipulating in there, who knows? Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? But it's an interesting ride. Thank you so much, Professor Wolff. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, you're watching actTV. I'm Julianna Forlano. What a show, huh? What a show. See, now this show doesn't have like specific answers for you. At the beginning, I gave you, we talk about not being able to ride the algorithm on YouTube or on some of these other online medias because we're trying to be reasonable. We're trying to bring reasonable discussion. We're trying to bring the voices of activists. That doesn't get out there very much. We're trying to bring voices of academics. Again, hard to find those voices in the algorithm, but we're doing it here. And what we need, because the algorithm doesn't help us, is your help. So please leave us a comment or post us on your Facebook page, or cut a clip of it and put it with the link on your TikTok or whatever it is you're doing, or just show your grandmother. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. You can find me personally at Julianna Forlano on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook. You can find actTV across platforms. Coming up on Thursday in our show at 2 p.m., we're going to be talking about what the progressives who are in government are actually doing. Like they had a meeting and we covered it, and they said a lot of interesting things. So we want to take those things and show them to you, so that you and I together can keep their feet to the fire as we proceed on in these interesting times. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.